It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm. It's time for The Verdict.
And welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and I am joined as always by one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. Kent, what's up for today?
Well, we're getting back to our the tenor of our name, The Verdict, back to a legal subject. Last week we were pleased to have the Chief Justice of the Oklahoma Supreme Court, the Honorable Joe Watt, on to talk about the functions of the Supreme Court. That's the first in a three-part series we're going to have on the Oklahoma Appellate Court system. Today we're going to have the Honorable Charles Johnson, the presiding judge of the Court of Criminal Appeals in Oklahoma, to discuss the other side of the appellate system, the criminal side. I think Judge Johnson and his other four contemporaries have quite a compelling story to tell on how criminal justice is handled in the state of Oklahoma, and I believe it's going to be a very, very interesting show with some new facts that our viewers won't know.
And some historical elements, I think, to this show that are being interesting.
Yes, some good history.
This morning, Judge Charles Johnson. It's next on The Verdict.
We'll get you a chair, and we'll get you mic'd up here, and be careful of the drop-off there. Don't walk backwards. Here comes Kathy.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers is going to introduce our guest.
We are very pleased today to have the Honorable Charles Johnson, the presiding judge of the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, with us to carry out the duty of explaining the second court in our three-part series on Oklahoma appellate courts. And Judge Johnson is a Ponca City native. He graduated from the University of Oklahoma, both undergraduate and law. He practiced law privately in Ponca City for approximately 32 years. In 1989, was appointed to the Court of Criminal Appeals, and in 1993 made his mark early because he was then selected as the Appellate Judge of the Year by the Oklahoma Trial Lawyers Association. Judge Johnson is married, has two children, making his first, but I hope not last, appearance on The Verdict. Judge Johnson, welcome to The Verdict.
Thank you, Kent. Good to be here with you. An old friend from a long time ago.
Long time ago, that's right. Well, we're pleased you join us. One kind of interesting note that has always kind of tickled me about your court, not about the members of your court, but about the name of your court. I know years ago it had a different name than the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. I think it was called the Criminal Court of Appeals, and that got changed.
That got changed. I think some of the judges thought that they were the criminals, so
well,
they got the legislature to change the name.
And since 1959, it's been called the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. Well, by its name, I take it the only type of cases you handle are criminal cases.
That's correct.
How common is that in the United States to have an appellate court that only handles criminal cases, does not get involved in civil matters?
Well, it's actually very unique. There are only two states that have that bifurcated system, Texas and Oklahoma, and we probably, I'm not totally sure, but we probably got the idea from Texas. It was put in the Oklahoma Constitution in 1907.
And the court's been established since 1908, functioning that way?
One of the first legislative bills was establishing the court in 1908.
How many judges are there like yourself, and are they divided up? I know we have a graphic that shows basically the divisions across the state of Oklahoma. We can take a look at that, and you can discuss the number of judges and how the cases are distributed.
Mick, there are 5. I happen to be from number 2 up there. Up in the corner is Judge Chappell, who is from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Gary Lumpkin, Judge Lumpkin from the southeastern part of the state. Judge Rita Strubar, the first female, by the way, to ever be on our court, and the first female who has been a presiding judge, is from the Oklahoma City area. And then Judge Steve Lyle is the newest member of our court, and he's from Lawton.
And it's wherever charges are filed, is that where the case would ultimately come back to you on appeal?
As a general rule, wherever the crime occurs, that would be the county in which the trial would occur.
But all of them end up in your court in Oklahoma City.
Every criminal case, misdemeanor, felony, death case, whatever.
That is appealed.
They all appeal to our case.
Well, you have 5 judges. How are your judges selected?
We are on what is called the modified Missouri plan. Those judges that are appellate judges stand for retention on a yes-no ballot every 6 years. Trial judges, for instance, Oklahoma County, Cleveland County, those particular judges can be elected, but they're nonpartisan. They do not run on a partisan ballot, i.e. Democrat, Republican. But appellate courts are handled differently. We get in, we are selected through a process through the Judicial Nominating Commission. So all of our judges we cannot run for the office. We have to go through a Judicial Nominating Commission. I think back to some 14 years ago when I got on the court, there were 27 applicants at the time that I was there. They go through a process. The OSBI goes out and investigates your background, talks to your neighbors to see what your character is, talks to other lawyers, check your military records, your income tax. So they do a thorough background study, and then that commission then selects 3 names, gives those names to the governor, and the governor selects one of those 3.
On a previous show of The Verdict, Justice Watt discussed certiorari procedures. How does that apply to your court?
We do not have certiorari. Certiorari would be if we had a court under us. But we do not. We handle all of the criminal cases. We're the court of last resort. An appeal from our court would go to the U.S. Supreme Court, just as an appeal from the Oklahoma Supreme Court would go to the U.S. Supreme Court. They have no jurisdiction in criminal matters. We have no jurisdiction in civil matters.
Mm-hmm. Does it work out well that way?
I think it works out very well. There are 2 other states, Alabama and Tennessee, that have courts of criminal appeals that are a secondary court. They're a mid-level court. Florida and California are both looking at the system to implement it. Tragically, in this country, we are seeing more criminal cases filed than civil cases, especially at the appellate level.
Go ahead.
You know, historically we hear about how slow the judicial system is and how when someone gets an appeal it can take a long, long time. Historically, has that been true in Oklahoma, and what's the change of pace there?
Yes, it has been. When I got on the court some 14 years ago, the court was basically 4 years behind.
So if once a person was found convicted and sentenced, say, to McAllister, it would be at least 4 years before that case would be heard on appeal?
That's correct.
Back in the 1980s.
And as should have happened, prisoners are very ingenious people. They and brought lawsuit in the federal court for what they call systemic delay. They sued the state of Oklahoma, our court, the judges, the indigent defense system. And it was actually sort of ended up being settled, but the court did find that there was systemic delay. The legislature put more money into the system, more money into indigent defense, more money into our court to allow us to get current. And we are now current and have been current for probably at least 5 years. And we're probably one of the most current courts in the country.
How on earth did you get caught up going from 4 years down to less than 1 year?
Well, the legislature gave us some additional staff, temporary staff, to get through the backlog. Then we put in some internal rules, and I don't know, maybe we're working harder. I'm not sure.
Well, if we have time, let me...
another 45 seconds or so in this segment.
Let's compare civil and criminal. There are more criminal cases filed in a given year in Oklahoma than civil cases.
Tragically.
And those civil cases, if appealed, would go up to the Supreme Court and then be probably farmed out to the Court of Civil Appeals, and we'll talk about that next Sunday, for distribution and decision. And that is among many, 9 on the Supreme Court, and how many on the Court of Appeals? How many judges on the Court of Appeals?
They have 12.
12. On the criminal side, where there's a heavier load, that automatically goes to your court to be divided among 5 judges, and yet you're current with that huge caseload. That you must be working hard.
Well, we think so. We take pride in the fact that we are current, Kent, and it was not easy to get there, but we sure don't want to get behind again.
Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We're visiting with Judge Charles Johnson. You're watching The Verdict, and we'll be right back. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. This week's guest is Judge Charles Johnson with the Court of Criminal Appeals. Kent, what's next?
Judge, I know in many courts there are oral arguments made on appeal. Does your court entertain oral arguments on criminal cases?
Yes, sir, Kent. We must, by law, have oral argument on death cases. The oral argument is approximately 2 hours long. And then we, by the way, we have several of those at the university law schools. We go to OCU, to TU, and OU and hold those oral arguments. But, and then we also have what we call a fast track on Thursdays, where we do approximately 4 cases where there's oral argument. It's 15 minutes aside. We then hear the argument. We go back into chambers, and we actually vote on the case and come out and tell people what the verdict is. So that has helped us, by the way, part of the reason that we are current.
Well, how is a particular case put on a fast track or not?
Depending on the type of the case.
That's it.
And you could opt on also.
You'll have, before the oral argument, you'll have all of the briefs, presumably, all of the record that you're going to have. Do you typically get familiar with that before the oral argument?
Yes, I have a great staff, and the court then has five other attorneys that do not work for a particular judge. They prepare like the fast track memos. We get a memo from staff, we get the briefs, and we read those and examine those prior to the oral argument. I think all of the judges on our court do examine all of those, whether it's a death case or whatever. For oral argument, I think we're very well prepared.
But do you find yourself thinking one side seems to have a little stronger position than the other when you're reading, and then perhaps have your mind changed at oral argument?
Kent, I love lawyers. They're the best people I know, and they're ingenious. Yes, I changed my mind. It's amazing when you hear some oral argument. It's different than a cold brief or just reading a page. When you hear someone explain something in their own way, I tend to, it's not only informative, but I think it does change minds.
And I suppose it gives you an opportunity, if you choose to do so, to ask a question or two.
And we do.
Now, do all 5 judges decide every case?
Yes, we do not have panels.
And it takes 3, I guess, to change a result or affirm a result.
That's correct.
What about death penalty cases? Are they handled differently than other cases on appeal?
Technically, they're handled a little bit differently in that there is more time given in the appeal. The court reporter has more time to prepare a case. In the normal felony case, for instance, if a case were tried today, a verdict came in a case today in Oklahoma County, it would take in excess of 300 days for that case to become at issue. In other words, be ready for the judges to work on. All of that time is spent in the briefs, in the transcript, preparing the transcripts, and then the case is finally submitted to the court when it is at issue, and we have internal rules that we must get that case out within 60 days. We're averaging about 45 days from the date that I get a case until it's handed down. So a case that's tried today in Oklahoma County, a decision out of our court, if it is appealed, will be in probably less than 1 year from the date of that verdict.
We hear that federally prosecuted death penalty cases seem to come to a conclusion faster than a state death penalty case. Is that accurate, and why would that be the situation?
Well, of course, if it's a federal case, you're not going to have any state involvement. Since it is a state death case, a party has the right to have federal constitutional rights as well as state constitutional rights. So a death case, although it takes in a normal felony case a year or a little less, a death case is probably going to take a little bit in excess of 2 years. Then it's going to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, who normally within 6 months will act. It will come back to our court on what we call post-conviction relief, and if that is affirmed, then that's the end of the case from Oklahoma's standpoint. Then the case would go into the federal system under federal habeas, and people are always asking, why does it take so long? Well, the reason is most of that time, probably 3/4 of the time, is spent in the federal habeas system and not in the state system.
Well, you can affirm a conviction or you can reverse a conviction. Tell our viewers what your reversal rate is on percentage basis.
Well, tragically, reversals make news. Affirming a case doesn't make news. We affirm basically 94% of the cases that come before us. Of that 6% that may be reversed, there's what we call reverse and dismiss, which means we as a matter of law say that there were not sufficient facts. That probably occurs in about 1% or less of the cases that we handle. Those other 5% would go back for another trial, and lo and behold, we see them again.
Yeah, they come back again.
None of us want the innocent to be imprisoned. What should we be done about the DNA type cases where we question evidence for previous cases, and how do you view all that?
Well, that's a really serious problem. The DNA is a great step forward in proving innocence or, in a way, proving guilt. It has released some people that were incarcerated when they should not have been incarcerated. The state of Oklahoma, through the Attorney General, through our court, through the indigent defense system, has looked at all of those cases, and quite frankly, we haven't found, but I think actually 2 that were factually innocent.
Well, Mark Furman's book would seem to indicate that the system's broken here in Oklahoma.
To me, it seems to be working very well. I think we have one of the finest indigent defense systems in the country. They have a great staff in Norman. They do fine work. I think our court is current. We feel that the system does do a good job. It's not perfect. No system is, but we feel that on a whole, there is fairness, and quite frankly, when you look at cases, you just don't find much factual innocence.
We're out of time. Judge Johnson, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Kent and I'll be back with a final word after this. You're watching The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict. Very interesting guest.
Really, he is. And as he indicated, I've known him for a long time, long before he went on the court. But he has just been a stellar performer, as are the other 4 members of that court. And I think that the taxpayers ought to send a note of thanks to the Court of Criminal Appeals for cutting down the time that is required to dispose of the appeal and cut the caseload, and to handle the caseload, because the caseload is not diminishing. As he indicates, a rather startling statistic is that more criminal cases than civil cases are filed, and yet they're being disposed of by 5 members very, very expeditiously. I'm not saying, by suggesting that, I'm not saying that the Supreme Court or the Court of Civil Appeals are being slow. They're not. But it's just the appellate court system in this state functions really well, and that's one reason we wanted to have this three-part series, is to let our viewers know just in this particular state how their appellate courts are working. And quite frankly, although we're only 2/3 through the story, the answer is quite well.
Well, we always want to hear from our viewers and see what they'd like to see on a future episode of The Verdict, so go to our website and tell us what you think. TheVerdict.tv, just like it sounds. Thanks again to our guest, Judge Charles Johnson. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
The Verdict is sponsored in part by the Able Law Firm,